Hello, I'm Dr. Trevor Mendes, Head of Academic Affairs at PIM, doing this chapter 4. I'm pretty sure Professor Fonseca would have covered uh, first three areas. Now, this subject is economic analysis for business. We don't talk much about economics, but we talk how can we use economics to make business decisions in the corporate world. But having said that, we have set aside the first three videos for you to just get some basic knowledge about economics, fundamentals of economics, demand and supply, and elasticity of demand and supply, and so on. And with that, we will slowly move to this chapter. And this is about market structures. What is a market structure? Now, before that, I will tell you I have given the assignment in the course outline. Carefully read that assignment. This subject has two assignments. One is an individual assignment, written assignment. Other one is the group presentation. For both, you are getting 20% each, and then the balance 60% for the final exam. Most probably the final exam would be a take-home exam subject to Turnitin. So that's the structure for the assessment, and we will be having discussion sessions. So based on your knowledge as well as the gray areas or doubts can be clarified when we have the discussion session. First discussion session would be conducted by Professor Fonseca, and then probably the second one will also be conducted by him, but third and fourth sessions I'll be conducting. So you can ask me anything. So we will start this market structure. What is a market structure? The concept of a market structure is understood as those characteristics market that influence the behavior and results of firms working in that particular market. The analysis of market structures is of great importance when studying microeconomics. So all these are microeconomics. So four types of market structures: pure or commonly known as perfect competition, monopolistic competition, oligopoly competition, and monopoly competition. So four types of market structures. We'll take now one by one. So perfect competition is more towards the left side of the continent. Market where goods are produced using the most efficient techniques and the amount of factors of production. This market is considered to be realistic, considered to be unrealistic, nevertheless of special interest for hypothetical and theoretical reasons. Most efficient techniques, you can see. And also, when it comes to perfect competition, there are certain characteristics under this market structure. One is that large number of buyers and sellers. Large number of buyers and sellers. Example, private buses and so on, right? Well-informed buyers and sellers. Exactly. Buyers know what's happening in the market. Sellers also equally know what's happening in the market. So well-informed buyers and sellers. Identical or homogeneous product, whether you're going from Moratuwa to Colombo or Alutgama to Galle or whatever the place, Borella to Narayanpeta, you get the same product, homogeneous product, same service. Even if you're buying bread, mostly you get the same product, homogeneous product. No individual control over market supply and price. Individuals who are competing in this perfect competition has no say or no control, right? And also they can enter the market at any moment and exit from the market at any moment. And perfect mobility of factors of production, you all know, land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. So you can move here and there, and no bias preference. So these are some of the characteristics you get in perfect competition. You can see many buyers and sellers, apples, right? Just an indication, just an example. Homogeneous product and no bias preference. Apple is Apple. Only difference is sometimes you can get buy the green apple or the red apple, but it doesn't matter. So many buyers and sellers. These are few examples. Second one, monopolistic competition. Now, as an example, if we have 100,000 competitors under perfect competition, when it comes to monopolistic competition, the number of competitors will come down to about 10,000. So it comes down. Perfect competition, many buyers and sellers or many competitors, massive, you can't count them basically. But when it comes to monopolistic, it comes down further down. Say as an example, 100,000 perfect competition, 10,000 monopolistic competition. Large still, 10,000 is a large number of buyers and sellers, but less than in perfect competition. This is what exactly I explained. Less mobility, factors of production are not freely mobile, right? There can be restrictions and certain barriers. More elastic demand, when the price goes up by 10%, demand will come down by 20%, 25%, more than proportionate. Meets all conditions of perfect competition except for identical products, right? Almost same, but except for identical product. Product differentiation. Now, in this particular market, monopolistic market, product differentiation is one of the key aspects. Example, hardware shops, salons, restaurants. They try to differentiate their products and services to attract the customers. Another variance is compared to perfect competition is companies competing under monopolistic competition try to go with advertising as well, little bit of advertising, maybe BTL below the line, but still little bit of competition can be seen. But mainly they focus on product differentiation. Monopolistic competitors use non-price competition, as I told you, advertising, giveaways, other promotions, and so on. So now you see slight, right, differences, marginal differences between perfect competition and monopolistic competition. Then the further things, now you can see these Gap, denim, Levi's, denim, and CK denim. But you can see the product differentiation, real life examples. I mostly quote real life examples because for MBAs, theory is important, but at the same time, application of theory with real life examples are of paramount importance. So I always quote real life examples. This is one of them. Same as pure competition except for product differentiation. Monopolistic competition, further you can see Pantene shampoo and conditioner, $12. Frederick Fekkai, $40 for the upmarket. Maybelline, $4, cheap. Sisley, $45. So you can see how they differentiate such products, different value additions and so on. Are these products different? Yes, but they sell in monopolistic competition. Examples from Sri Lanka, as I told you, hardware shops, salons, restaurants, right? They try to differentiate their products. Certain restaurants don't have takeaways or they don't have delivery, but they try to cater to the customers who come there. But certain people have a wide range or buffet and so on. Lots of examples, salons, various hardware shops. Some people have whatever from A to Z, or some people focus only on paints, various things. Third one is oligopoly competition. Now slowly it's coming to the middle. Only few large sellers dominate the industry. They can be counted with your fingers, maybe 10, 20, maximum 25. Example, banks. insurance companies, automobile manufacturers, telecommunication competitors. These are real life examples. A few very large sellers. Oligopolies act independently by lowering prices soon after the announcers the cut. Collusion formally agreed to set price because now in oligopoly market competition, mainly due to the behavior of the kinked demand curve, if one company tries to reduce the price with the intention of increasing their market volumes, market share, other competitors competing in the market will also reduce their price. So the anticipated price reduction of this company cannot be achieved because others have also reduced their prices. But if one company increases the price, other companies will not do so, so they might lose the market share. So that's why they say when you are competing or if you are competing in oligopoly market structure, price P is prohibited, or you should not deal with price P, but you have to focus on all other P's like the product, promotion, physical evidence, people, performances, processors, and all other P's, but not the price P. Non-price competition, this is what exactly I say. This is so important under oligopoly market structure. Barriers to entry, yes, just like the perfect competition or the monopoly competition, no one can just enter or exit. No, because the capital investment is very high. Example, telecommunication companies, banks, automobile. So they have to have massive capital investment as well as massive capital investment and very high technology, state-of-the-art technology. So many barriers to entry because of the volume and the capital investment, as well as once they make a commitment of that volume of capex, definitely you can't just get out from the market. Interdependence is there. As an example, if you take the cement industry in Sri Lanka, which is into oligopoly, when the government imposes certain barriers or price reductions, they get together, Putlam, INSEE, Ultratox, Ambuja, all these Tokyo, Marines, all these people get together and go and speak to the government as a collective force. So in certain instances, you can see due to few players in the market, little bit of interdependency does exist. Large investments, high tech, as I told you. So these are some of the characteristics of oligopoly. Kink demand curve, as I explained, this is how it behaves. From the figure we know, and this is how it works. And the graphical illustration I have given, so just go through that. And these are some of the examples: mobile phones, Samsung, Apple, Ford, Aston Martin, Jaguar, Land Rover, Volvo, General Motors, Chevrolet, Buick, Pontiac, GMC, Saturn, Hummer, Saab, Cadillac, all are into oligopoly market structure. They have huge capital investment, huge technology. Chrysler. Examples from Sri Lanka: banks, telecommunication companies, insurance companies, cement companies, and so on. Fourth one is monopolistic competition. Microsoft, basically. Large number of buyers, but only one seller. Large number of buyers. Now you can see the way in the descending order. Perfect competition, many competitors. Monopolistic, it has reduced substantially. Oligopoly, only handful, you can count them with your fingers, and monopoly, one. No close substitutes. Example, cigarettes. We take BD in Sri Lanka, but still BD is not considered as a substitute for cigarettes. Complete control over market supply and price. But under monopoly competition, they say that competitor can either decide the supply, quantity of supply, or the price. They can't decide both, price or quantity. They can either choose their price or they can choose the quantity, that they will produce and allow market to set the price. Both cannot be controlled. Example, certain locations, types of monopolies, not only the products but services, locations, there can be unique location. Example, Sigiriya, monopoly state or monopoly location in the world. Natural monopolies are there, efficient production by a single supplier. Geographic monopolies are there, a small town, Trincomalee Harbour. Examples from Sri Lanka, Ceylon Tobacco, Electricity Board. Most of the state organizations in Sri Lanka are monopoly. That's why they don't even know the level of competition in the world. Economic policy. Economic policy refers to the actions that governments take in economic matters that covers the systems for setting interest rates and government budget as well, and the labor market, national ownership, and many other areas of government intervention into the country. Such policies are often influenced by international institutions like IMF, World Bank, and so on. So economic policy is an important aspect or important policy for any nation. Importance of economic policy. Now, recently in one of the webinars, I mentioned that we have to have an economic policy, not only with the economic aspects, but also to include few other non-economic aspects, taking Singapore as an example during Lee Kuan Yew's time. So economic policy importance, right? Economic policy of a country reflects the direction of the economy. This is where we want to take our country economically. It's like designing a strategic plan for a corporate company. When a country has a well-designed, meticulously thought, well-thought economic policy, like in Singapore or Germany, Japan, right? You can take any country to great heights. It gives the direction for the country or the nation. It can be either favorable or unfavorable for investors based on the policy formulation and the stance that the government has. Economic now, as an example, with the second one, what do you mean by unfavorable? As an example, now most of the FDIs, foreign direct investors in Sri Lanka, cannot buy our properties, but they can take them on lease. So from their perspective, it can be an unfavorable thing. But from our perspective, we don't want to sell our lands to foreigners. So these are a few examples. Labor law in Sri Lanka, it's another area of concern. Economic policy in a country has a direct correlation to economic growth. Now, if you take so many countries, my dear friends, if I can come there, I can explain a lot, but due to this COVID-19, we are being restricted with our, knowledge, imparting knowledge, but I'll try to explain as much as possible. Now, if the economic policies are sound, also there's another school of thought which says that the country is also politically stable or vice versa. So if you have a solid economic policy, that has a direct impact and direct correlation with the economic growth in that particular country. Example, Singapore, Japan, Germany, and so on, even France to a certain extent. Most factors of economic policy can be divided into either fiscal policy, which deals with the government actions regarding taxation and spending, or monetary policy, which deals with central banking actions regarding the money supply and interest rates. So two things about the government actions, taxation, spending, and so on, fiscal policy. Now, about 3-4 years back, Sri Lanka designed a good fiscal policy. Up to now, they were just doing haphazardly. And the monetary policy focuses on central bank action or central bank duties, responsibilities, money supply, interest rates, and so on. Objectives of and economic policy. This varies from nation to nation. Now, if you take Middle East countries, because they have so much of oil or oil-rich countries, their economy will mostly depend on oil prices and oil supply and demand. But other countries, China, probably cheap labor and adequate resources and so on. So they design their economic policies accordingly. Germany, third biggest exporter in the world and so much of quality. So their economy is, designed based on those advantages. Singapore, nothing, but it has become an energy hub, right? And they provide so much of facilities for foreign direct investments and then for exports, tourism. So they have, so like that, it varies from country to country depending on their factors of production, other assets, and the nature of the politics and all these things. But generally, they want to achieve four major goals. Stabilizing markets. Markets cannot be fluctuating. It has to be stable, stabilized markets. Promoting economic prosperity, high standard of living, growing GDP, increasing per capita income, people living happily. Now, as per CNN, the happiest people in the world live in Denmark, it seems. They're so happy, they don't have to worry about anything. One of the Scandinavian countries. So that's the status of economic prosperity. Sometimes there can be developed nations like America, but no human prosperity or no economic prosperity. So I hope you understand the difference between economic prosperity. Ensuring business development, FDIs, quality products, improvements, all these technical aspects, research and development, all these things. And the fourth one is promoting employment. One is that unemployment, those who don't have jobs. Other one is underemployment. Now it's also, it creates a little bit of concern. If you are qualified as whatever, do you have the appropriate job for you? You may be doing a job, you are not unemployed, but is it the required or most suitable job for your credentials, right? So think about this, unemployment or underemployment, that comes under promoting employment. Additional objectives, there can be a lot depending again on the nation. Military spending. Now, if I remember right, Japan is spending the highest amount on military during the year 2020. I don't know what will happen due to COVID, but they set aside a massive amount, I think some $12 billion or something like that for their military spending. Now, during the war, Sri Lanka was also spending a lot. Then nationalization, whether the private sector would be allowed to run certain things or all private sector investments, everything would be nationalized, like what Hugo Chavez did in Venezuela when he was living about 10 years back, nationalization. Fidel Castro did that. So these are some of the things, and taxation and various other things. So economic policy is basically four-dimensional, but can even go up to 10 or whatever, depending on the country or their policies and so on. Objectives of economic policy. Contemporary economic policy objectives may be inequality of income, but very difficult, practically impossible, but it can be one objective. Environmental dangers and sustainability. Now, most of the developed nations or good nations have incorporated sustainability into their economic policies. We also focus based on United Nations Sustainability Development Goals, 14 goals, but I don't know whether we are really working on them, but it has to be incorporated. International and domestic political tensions, especially we'll be covering geopolitics in the last chapter. But what is the impact? Also, for your information, my dear friends, I have uploaded a document developed by me explaining what you mean by impact, because we talk a lot about impact, but we hardly know what is impact, what do you mean by impact, how do you assess impact, who are the stakeholders of impact, and so on. So I developed this document and have uploaded that for your information. So much of domain. Now you see China and India these days are fighting unofficially, but Sri Lanka is pressed between them, getting sandwiched between them. So what is the pressure? All due to Iranian issue, sanctions over Iran, Sri Lanka cannot export tea, and also we can't get fuel from them because they were giving some long-term credit to Sri Lanka. So international and domestic political tensions are there. Or if the government is unstable or going for elections after COVID, so since February, basically nothing is happening in Sri Lanka. All are following the wait and see policy. Cyber vulnerabilities, hacking, and various issues. I hope you have read my articles in LinkedIn. All this thing I have clearly said that in time to come, corporate sector has to focus on bioweapons to protect their companies, products, and services, and that should be a part and parcel of strategy formulation. For example, if there's a man-made bacteria to destroy our tea industry, what is the strategy that we have well in advance to overcome that situation before it happens? That has to be now incorporated into strategy formulation. So, and also if you really study in the contemporary world, the formulation of economic policy for a nation goes well beyond the economic parameters. This is what exactly about 30 years back Lee Kuan Yew did in Singapore. Now only actually we are thinking about these things, but Singapore was doing all these things well in advance. So think about these things. I'll give you some more stuff on this. Recessions. Example, now 2009 recession virtually destroyed America and Europe. But remember, my dear friends, even during recession, there were countries like New Zealand, China, India, right? They were strong. They didn't feel the recession. Why? Why? They had sound economic policies. They were doing business to the size of their finger, no overtrading, or no, they were not going beyond anything. So if you have sound economic policies, even if there's an earthquake, you might shake a bit or float a bit, but you would not fall. So that's the kind of economic policy that we need. But now see, due to COVID-19, Sri Lankan economy has really come down. So why? Our economic foundations were not so strong. So we have to have a solid economic policy as a nation. Not only that, I have clearly said all in my, in my all articles and everything, we have to have a minimum of 7 policies: proper economic policy, energy policy, education policy, agriculture policy, transport policy, health policy, foreign policy, and trade policy. At least 8 policies we need as a nation for the next 15 to 20 years. Not for 5 years. All our policies have been short term, just to win the next elections, just to win the next provincial council elections, all short term. So short term, you don't have strategies, my dear friends. You get tactical plans. But if it is a strategy, it should go beyond, or if it is a policy, it should go beyond the next general elections or presidential elections, probably till 2030 or so. That's now India has this, Japan has this, Singapore has this, America has this 20-year, 15-year policy, Germany has this, recently Italy implemented. So these are very, very important aspects. That's why I say economic analysis for business goes beyond economic parameters. As I told you, Singapore, free market economy. Singapore was a fishing colony about 50 years back. Still, if you fly from Malaysia to Singapore, normally plane goes little lower. You can see the way people do fishing, just like in Galle Matra area in Sri Lanka. But Lee Kuan Yew converted this fishing colony into a modern country, and no foreign debt, because they generate enough foreign exchange. Even New Zealand, with this COVID, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern declared and set aside $6 billion, $2 billion for health sector to tackle COVID-19 issue in New Zealand. $2 billion to spend and to protect people and companies during the COVID period, like social benefit, this thing, and if somebody loses job, they pay 75% of their salary and various things. And 2 billion, the balance 2 billion to revamp the businesses after COVID. Now they are into that. So these are, well-planned strategy. They have enough money. They have enough foreign exchange. I do agree. But still, see the leadership or see the economic policies, how those countries are getting benefited due to sound economic policies. Singapore converted into an energy hub. They don't have oil, but they have every ship that is passing Singapore will go reach their harbors and get some oil or say energy hub. Service oriented tourism. If you are sick, most of the rich people go to Mount Elizabeth. Health tourism is a booming industry there. Services, wealth management, Singapore accounts in banking are so much of FDIs or deposits or whatever. So also focuses on, now this is my point, my dear friends, focuses on non-economic factors. Goh Chok Tong, who was the senior finance minister under Lee Kuan Yew on economic affairs, when he designed the economic policy for Singapore way back in 1981, if I remember right, he included purposely non-economic policies also into their economic policy. Example, third least as a result, one is elimination of corruption. You must be knowing that famous story when Lee Kuan Yew's best friend got caught for stealing $10,000. Case was there and the judgment was delivered, sending him to jail for 6 years. He went and told Lee Kuan Yew, best friend, please pardon me. Lee Kuan Yew said, no, if I pardon you, I'm creating a bad precedence. You go to jail and enjoy that 6 years and come back. I will accept you as again my best friend. But apparently I was told, I don't know if it's true or not, that he committed suicide inside the jail. So they completely removed corruption. Today, the third least corrupt country in the world. Does Sri Lanka have that in our economic policy? At least to become say within the top 25 least corrupt countries? That should be there. Personally, I feel as a strategist. So think about these things. First, in ease of doing business, FDIs, anybody, they don't have to go to 27 places to get the approval like in Sri Lanka. Number one, in ease of doing business. Everything is in black and white, transparency to the core, and right within I think 24 hours they can get the approval. Very smart. That's why lots of FDIs are going to Singapore. Regulatory efficiency. Public workers, public sector workers are on par with private sector. Rule of law to the core. One yardstick is there for everybody, whether you're a government servant or private worker or corporate worker or the government minister. And the other thing is meritocracy, purely on merit. Most of the ministers have PhDs or at least masters from Oxford or some other, and they professionally argue within the cabinet room, but they do the best for the country. Meritocracy, we can learn a lot. We can take so many leaves from that book, my dear friends. Research and development must, but here in Sri Lanka we don't have anything. We hate research. Accountants, the very first thing to cut is R&D. Second thing is to cut training. So, but even if you take Israel, they spend 6% on R&D from their GDP. And from that 6%, 2.8% is on arms and ammunition or military. That's why they have produced so many Nobel laureates. So research and development is very, very important. So these are some of the non-economic factors where Singapore has included into their economic policy. USA, highly developed mixed economy, right? I'm just making a comparison for you to get an idea. Least regulated and least unionized with high productivity. Just imagine least unionized but very high productivity. Because if you don't perform, they show the door. maximum utilization of natural resources, export-oriented economy, computers, pharmaceuticals, chemicals, weapons, everything. Exports are, I think, the biggest exporter still America, and China second, third Germany. Strategic intervention on infrastructure. Government intervenes strategically, economically, technically, and security-wise to provide that platform for the exporters to export. I'll give you a good real-life example. In 1995, under Bill Clinton's government, when they signed NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement with Mexico and Canada, North American continent, American government built with the support of the Canadian government connecting three countries to facilitate transport, a highway going up to about, I think, massive, say about 2,000 kilometers. That is to facilitate transport, containers, everything from Mexico to Canada, then back to America and so on. So that is a real life example for strategic intervention of a government on infrastructure, because private sector will never intervene on those things. Most active and largest financial market, right? US Treasury bonds. And now, you know, about 2 years back when Donald Trump increased the bond rate by 0.25%, all other currencies depreciated. Even Sri Lankan rupee depreciated 7%. Indian rupee depreciated 9%, American dollar, sorry, Australian dollar depreciated 11%. So huge financial market, New York stock market, New York financial market, massive, and $4 trillion. Technology-driven country, so much Microsoft and Apple and so many brands are there, patent rights and all that. Again, research and development. They have so much of research and development. So research and development is key for any economic policy. The question is, do we have that in Sri Lanka? Hub for international transactions. Encouragement for superiority in all dimensions, war, technology, exports. They have that ego, you know, that they want to be number one. What about the Sri Lankan economy? Little bit of homework. What do you think? Next time when we discuss, come up with some suggestions, right, to design a good economic policy for Sri Lanka. Thank you very much.